We welcome in on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline now, writer from The Athletic, Chris Vannini, covering college football specifically with us today. Chris, welcome to BYU Sports Nation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, Chris, it is July 1st, and here we are yet again talking about teams moving conferences, specifically UConn leaving the American to go back to the Big East in all sports but football. And now a team like BYU is all of a sudden in the conversation again. What do you think about talking about potential conference realignment in July of 2019 and not further down the road when all these TV contracts come up?
Right. I mean, like 5-6 years from now is when we expected to have more realignment talk when a lot of these Power 5 TV contracts come up. But when it comes to UConn, I can't say I was really surprised. There had been rumblings for quite a while that UConn wasn't happy. They came out publicly upset with the TV deal that the conference announced in the spring. So there was a lot of tension going on. And when the news finally happened, it was more like, all right, that kind of makes sense. Whether this is going to kick off a mini round of realignment, I'm not thinking that's the case, but, you know, anything's possible, and UConn is a big enough name that it's certainly drawing a lot of attention right now.
Why was UConn upset about that TV deal? Because from what we understand, the Athletic is feeling pretty good about $7 or $8 million per team moving forward.
Yeah, it wasn't a money thing. It was about basketball, really. Men's and women's basketball plays a lot of games on SNY, a local station up in the Northeast, and this deal put all of those games on ESPN, ESPN Plus. You know, that stuff behind the paywall was a real sticking point for a lot of UConn fans. And Mike Aresco was saying that there was talk about sub-licensing some of those games to SNY. He was saying ESPN Plus is still going to be a net positive, but UConn was not happy about that. They said that publicly. And in the end, they decided to make a move that was really all about, at least primarily driven by basketball.
Chris, whenever there is mention of conference realignment or maybe there's a spot open in another conference, BYU's name inevitably is brought up. One of the biggest reasons, obviously, is because football is currently independent. Hypothetically speaking, who would get more out of an American BYU partnership, the conference themselves or the BYU Cougars?
I think it depends on the year, but overall, I think the American would probably get more out of it. It would extend the conference's reach out west into another time zones away, so they could get some later kickoffs as well. It would bring, obviously, BYU's an incredibly large fan base. It would bring all of that into the league. It's kind of what Navy has done, and I was talking to some Navy folks last week, and they have really much liked joining the American because it brings more attention from the conference onto Navy. But BYU is in a position where it's obviously a national brand, a strong history, that I think the American would get more out of it than BYU. But I don't think it's a zero-sum game. I think there would be benefits for BYU as well.
The Athletics' Chris Vannini with us on BYU Sports Nation. We've been asking a number of your professional writing colleagues about whether or not BYU can get more attention, if you will, from the nation by staying independent and winning big games against these big-name teams they seemingly play week after week, especially this season, or if they go to the American and let's say one time in the next 5 years they win the conference and position themselves to potentially be in a New Year's Six bowl game, what's going to get BYU more attention as far as the nation is considered?
Well, this is kind of what I was alluding to before. I look at Navy, and Kenny Machalolo from Navy told me last week, he said, you know, when we were an independent, the only people who cared about our game were our fans and whoever we were playing. And week to week it changed. But ever since they've joined the American, you've got Houston fans who are interested in Navy. You've got Memphis fans, UCF fans. Everybody's paying attention to Navy. And I think BYU would get more attention that way because when you have those big games as an independent, it certainly brings a lot of attention. But week to week, you don't necessarily have fans, outside fans, following what you're doing every week and seeing where you are and continuing to pay attention to you. And if BYU were to join a conference, they would get more attention from outside of their fan base on the league or on the team.
For those not in a P5 conference, you're always talking about how do we get into a P5 conference? How do we become part of that? The other option is that a G5 conference somehow makes it as a P5 conference and makes it a P6 conference. That's something that Mike Oresko talks a lot about, really believes that the American is poised to be that P6 conference. How likely do you think that is?
Not very. I mean, I understand why Mike pushed it. I think it has helped the brand of the league. I think it's helped even more that the teams have won and gotten to those New Year's Six games and won them. But you're not a P6 until you get an automatic berth into a New Year's Six bowl from your league specifically. And the college football playoff contract runs until 2026 unless they decide to change it and expand it. But outside of that, it's hard to see that happening right now. I mean, the Americans' new TV deal is far and away better than the other Group of Five TV deals at an average of $7 million a year, but it's still well below the Power Five league. So it's kind of the American, to me, is kind of in a middle tier between the Power Five and the rest of the Group of Five, which is not a bad spot to be. It's been a very successful league since it started in 2013. But getting to an official P6 doesn't happen until you get an automatic berth, and that's far down the road.
Chris Vannini, college football insider for The Athletic, with us on BYU Sports Nation. In your professional opinion, Chris, does BYU find itself in a better position to get an invite to a Power 5 conference by remaining independent and hoping things get crazy in 5 or 6 years again when those TV deals start to get renegotiated? Or is it in their best interest to join a conference, whether it be the American or another G5 conference, try and make a splash, and then hope that in the chaos in 5 years, or what we assume will be chaos, that maybe they get picked up then?
That's a tough call. I mean, I think on one hand you're right. If they join the American and start dominating the league, that'll certainly help their chances of moving up. But if they go and they're in the middle of the pack or they're contending every year, maybe not. If you're an independent, I think you've got a little bit more cachet, and you won't have an exit fee. It'll be a lot less messy if you decide to join. So it's a bit of a risk, I think, if they do something like joining the American, if the end goal is to get to Power 5. I think staying independent where they are is maybe the safer call.
Mike Oresko was very quick to say, everyone thinks we have to add a 12th member to the American. It's like, we don't necessarily look at it that way. If that's the way it works out, great, but we're perfectly fine staying at 11 teams. What do you think happens with the American? Do you think they stay at 11, or do you think when it's all said and done, a 12th team is added to the conference?
Well, I think that more than anything, this is going to come down to what they do football-wise. Can another team help or at least keep the status quo of the football television deal? I think BYU would help it. I think not many other teams would. That's one reason. If you go to 12, you're going to dilute the amount of money spread out to everybody, because you're probably going to lower that deal, because ESPN is expected to kind of renegotiate a little bit. It's not expected to tweak very much, but it is expected to change a little bit. And I don't think they add a 12th team unless it's somebody who is going to increase that television deal for everybody else.
Chris, I know you're a sports enthusiast that covers a ton of things. I'm a Baltimore Orioles fan, so can you say something to speak peace to my mind about the future of the Baltimore Orioles?
I'm not following baseball very much right now. I cannot speak much to the Orioles. I am from Detroit. I'm a Detroit Tigers fan, and we are in an equally terrible position right now with a lot of Miguel Cabrera contracts still to go. So I know the feeling.
All right, man. Hang tough. It's going to be okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Chris, so much for the time.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Chris Vannini on the Deseret First Credit Union Hotline. Deseret First, your values, your timeline, your financial future.